Tonight on Talking Politics, Governor Charlie Baker is once again defending his COVID surge responses as lawmakers press for more action and mandates. Plus, rent control is looking like a real possibility in the state for the first time in more than a quarter century. We'll get to all that and more ahead, but first to a more immediate housing concern in the city of Boston. The tents that lined the streets in the area around Mass Ave and Melnia Cass Boulevard were fully cleared this week as Boston Mayor Michelle Wu promised. Tarps, clothing, shoes, blankets, and other belongings were shoveled, bulldozed, and loaded into trash trucks. It was an effort that looked on the surface like the one former Mayor Marty Walsh undertook 4 years ago. But his successor promises this time will be different. Mayor Wu says her office has been working with everyone who'd been living in the encampments to find transitional housing while more permanent solutions are put in place. But there are still a lot of questions about how the area's former residents will move forward. GBH News' Tori Bedford was on the scene talking to people throughout the day Wednesday as the tents came down, and she joins me now. Hey, Tori.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let me ask you at the outset, what was the mood as the tents were coming down, and how were the people who lived in the encampments responding as they were cleared?
So this is the third sort of clearing. The language is really different. There was a big sign that said street cleaning conducted January 12th. This was the third kind of thing like this that the city has done since 2019. So the first one, obviously, Mayor Marty Walsh brought in, he was arresting and it was very kind of abrupt. And then former acting mayor Kim Janey brought in, she gave a deadline of 48 hours and people were evicted from their tents. And then this time around, since that happened in the beginning of November and now the Wu administration has, they said they've been on the ground working with people. They were able to place 83 people into temporary and transitional housing before they came in to do what they call the street cleaning. And as afterwards, they were able to place 154 people. The mood there were still a lot of people who were very confused. There were people who, they would still, I spoke to about 20 people who had spent the night out at the encampments. It was frigid. It was super cold, like single digit weather overnight. One man was found dead in the morning in a tarp in a tent. There was still a lot of confusion about it. I think that people felt like there's still something about bringing garbage trucks in and hiring people who had been living in the encampments to clear their neighbors' tents for a daily fee. I think it's something that, you get paid like $30 for the 10 hours or 12 hours of clearing the tents, bringing in the bulldozers. Some people, they were only able, they put things in storage, but they weren't able to take most of their tents and their belongings. And there was a lot of confusion. I think there was a lot of frustration. I think some people misunderstood and weren't able to take their stuff out.
I want to ask you about, I listened to some of the pretty remarkable sound that you got from people who have been living there. I want to ask you about one couple in particular, Evalberto Delbri and Wilnelia Rebing. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Let's take a listen to what they told you about their reaction, and then I'd like to hear more from you about their situation and what they're going to do next. But first, we'll take a listen.
I'm going to show but the thing is, I'm sick. I'm an HIV patient. I'm scared. It's scary in there. It's really scary. People coughing, sneezing, people that have no masks. Because my health, I worry about myself, so I prefer to stay outside.
I have open arm surgery right now. I still have the tubes in there. And I had 2 surgeries in the same arm. And it's spreading. And I'm just scared. I'm scared to die and get sick being in the shelter, knowing that I have medical conditions.
Tori, I want to make sure I get this right. They were not given private transitional housing. They were placed in a shelter, and they don't want to go for the reasons that we just described. Yeah.
Well, I got there in the morning, and what had happened was the previous month, the city did a census, and they counted that 145 people had been living out in the area, and they worked to find them transitional housing. Anyone who wasn't counted in the census was provided with shelter. They said, although towards the end of the night, so Mayor Wu came in the morning, assessed the situation, about 10 hours later, came back, walked down Atkinson Street, which had been cleared. There was police tape and around 50 people were standing out on Southampton Street. And, if you went out to talk to them, some of them didn't live in the area. Some people were able to go into shelter, but weren't in shelter yet. But there were quite a few people who had not been counted on that census, and they were not provided with that transitional housing that the city had said was their goal. And so Wilnelia and Adalberto, Wilnelia has stage 3 cancer, and Adalberto is HIV positive, and they just really don't feel safe staying in a shelter. So they had spoken to me about that this morning. They said nobody came and talked to them. The Madison Cass Monica Burrell came down with Mayor Wu, and we were doing an interview on the street. And I asked about the couple because Burrell had said every single person out there we have spoken to, we have offered them options. We have offered them a roof over their head.
I remember that moment where you actually were serving as basically a triage coordinator, hooking them up.
Well, I was a strange position to be in because I said, well, there's a couple down the street 50 feet away that say that no one has talked to them. And so immediately the city jumps into action. They're able to find them a hotel room for the night. They're getting them transportation to another place to live in Worcester. And so it was interesting because Mayor Wu has also said that there are more transitional housing beds available. The next day, I got a call from another man who said that throughout the day, no one had offered him shelter. He had been out on Southampton Street. He had tried to get into the shelters and had been rejected. And he had, apologized for my dog.
It's the way we live now. Totally fine.
Right. He walked throughout the street and he got on a train at some point just for warmth. He ended up in Revere. And he said that's when he just called 911 because it was freezing that night as well. And he ended up spending the night in an emergency room.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. A whole range of outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm. Just there were still people that were displaced and would have preferred, I think, a little more time to retain their housing structures. And I think, tents, some people were living in tents and nobody wants to be living out in a tent, but there are people who had kind of put together these structures where they did feel safer than being in a shelter, and those had to go.
As I ask this next question, I want to say, if you need to bring your dog into the shot to help your dog relax, that's totally fine. I want to ask you about that question of what maybe in theory could have been done differently. You spoke with another individual, Mayor Feliciano, who grew up on or around Mass Ave and actually spent some time living at Madison Cass and was there, I believe, helping a friend of his whose encampments were being cleared. Let's take a listen to his assessment of the situation.
I don't know, it's sad to see what's happening happen, but something needs to happen. I don't know, it's sad to see this, but there needs to be something better than this style of life.
I'd like to get your take on that, given how much you've reported here, because as you mentioned, you talked to people who experienced terrible cold the night before, who were talking about rats the size of cats running around the encampment. So on the one hand, there's the sense of home and a sense that maybe where they had been is preferable to the other options. But on the other hand, some of what you described just seems completely untenable. What is your take on whether the city moved too quickly to take radical action when it did?
What I think is really interesting is that we just have to take a step back and remember that we're talking about human beings. And when you tell someone that they are under threat of arrest, which is under the current executive order from the city, they're under threat of arrest if they do not remove their encampment, you are removing an option for them. And it's not a great option. It's really not safe. I mean, I mentioned there was a death, there was another body in the past 5 days. It's really not safe, to be out in these conditions. There's a lot of crime. It's really scary for people. But I think that the process, what's curious to me is that there had been a process over the preceding weeks and months to establish relationships with people and set up temporary housing for them. And I'm not sure why a big, garbage trucks and bulldozers had to come in and do this in one day. I don't know if that's because it's more efficient to do that. I don't know if that's it aligned with the coldest day of the year, but I think it was planned out a month in advance. So I don't think that was, I know that it was because they wanted to get people out of these dangerous, in this humanitarian crisis before the really cold weather set in. But I think the abruptness of that, when you are sort of having police officers telling people you've got to clear out, you've got to get out of this, I think that's when you are removing an option for people and making them feel like they don't have a choice.
Yeah, you're taking away their agency and doing it in a very dramatic way. Tori Bedford, we have to leave it there, but thank you for sharing the details that you just did. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And you can hear and see much more of Tori's reporting on GBH Radio 89.7 and on our website, gbhnews.org. As the last tent came down Wednesday night, Mayor Michelle Wu was there, as Tori said. But when she spoke outside the Pine Street Inn yesterday, she reiterated this was not a mission accomplished moment.
Yesterday was a turning point for the city of Boston. I want to be clear that we did not solve homelessness yesterday. The push and the fight to address homelessness and substance use and mental health continues with even more urgency now.
I'm joined now by GBH Politics editor Peter Kadzis and Boston Globe opinion columnist Marcela García. Hello to both of you. Marcela, let me start with you. As Tori Bedford mentioned a couple minutes ago, Mayor Wu was trying to do something that Mayor Janey, Acting Mayor Janey, and Mayor Walsh were not able to do, to come up with a solution for mass and cast and the problems that made it what it was once and for all. Do you think she's going to be able to succeed?
Well, only time will tell. I'm going to use the proverbial only time will tell. But if we go by how she handled this, which is, perhaps the first major action there, I think that bodes well for her success there. Notwithstanding the people whom Tori spoke with, I think that overall, it was a pretty big deal to have dismantled the encampments. Like you said, it was Walsh tried to do it in the summer of 2019 with Operation Clean Sweep, and the images that we got from that operation, with wheelchairs being destroyed, there was none of that. We did have obviously dump trucks and trash, compactors, but I don't really know what else you could bring to dismantle a camp of that nature, right? I mean, 140, 150 people there. It's a lot of stuff, right? So, there seems to have been quite a bit of planning around removing the tents, engaging people. Maybe they didn't get to everybody. Maybe they didn't give notice to everyone. But if we go by what was said, that not a single person was forcibly removed or there was no arrest, then I think that's a good thing. And look, the mayor is right. No single action is going to solve the long-term issues there. It's very, very complicated, and it's a multifaceted challenge and long-term. But I think she understands that. And the fact that she said that, we didn't solve homelessness, that, it tells you that she totally understands that. But definitely this was the right step in the right direction.
Peter Kadzis, I want to ask you about a politics but also media question that came up this week. Mayor Wu raised some eyebrows when she issued guidelines to the press prior to the clearances, first telling the media that we should stay 50 feet away from any individuals. That was changed a couple hours later to 10 feet away. I believe the mayor said it was a typo. And also that we should avoid showing the faces of individuals whose homes were being removed. What is your take on the mayor trying to shape the way coverage unfolded and trying to make it more sensitive?
Well, Adam, let me put it in some perspective. Many elected officials, especially mayors, are in love with the nanny state. Michael Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, tried to fight a war against sugar-heavy soft drinks. Mm-hmm. Our own Marty Walsh loved to tell people don't jump off their porch roofs into banks of snow.
Right, not Loon Mountain.
Hurt. Yeah. The Wu administration, just couldn't resist the urge to tell us how to do our jobs. And Tori's very moving story about those people who, for whatever reason, escaped the city's very diligent efforts to contact them would have been less powerful if she didn't have photographs of the people she was talking to.
I agree.
So these are early days for the Wu administration. Hopefully they learned a lesson here.
Let's hop to Beacon Hill, where some big important things happened this week. Marcela, Governor Baker met with the legislature's COVID Oversight Committee and made it clear, as he has in the past, that he is not interested in rolling out new mandates to stem the spread of COVID, nor is he interested at all, under any circumstances, in returning to remote learning. Let's watch an exchange on that latter point.
The idea that schools aren't safe is just not based on any data.
So,
It's just
Governor,
not. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna let people perpetuate this idea that schools aren't safe, because they are. And it's been proven not just in Massachusetts, but in the US and around the world for the better part of a year and a half.
Okay.
I think what Senator Comerford was trying to say there is, I didn't say to you, are schools safe? I was actually asking you about ramping up the quality of masks. She asked a different question than the one he answered, but we know he's down on remote schooling. That exchange notwithstanding, it seemed to me, Marcela García, like the tone was pretty amiable. I thought Baker was going to be raked over the coals after some of the failures that we saw coming out of the holidays when it comes to providing masks, providing testing to teachers. But I don't think he was. Why was the tone so mellow almost, do you think?
Well, if I have to guess, obviously, and I'm guessing here, it's, I think the moment we are in this, Omicron surge has to do, maybe that's the reason why. I feel like we are getting the message from the epidemiologists, from the experts, from the science that we're nearing the peak of the surge. And so, maybe there's less of an argument right now to mandate a universal mask, order statewide, right? Maybe this was a thing to do 3-4 weeks ago, right? Like late December, early January. The second reason why I may think that it's political, right? Like Baker is not running for re-election, and maybe I'm being too cynical here, but because I don't think that their whole drive is political, but part of it is obviously the legislature wants to keep them accountable, hold them accountable, but also, if he were running for re-election, I think the tone and those, it might have felt different.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to be overly cynical, but I think I cannot help but think that might be a reason.
That's a good point. Peter Kadzis, because we're shorter on time than I'd like, I need to hop with you to another big event on Beacon Hill this week. There was a long 7 or 8 hour, I think, rent control hearing. Back when Mayor Wu was campaigning to become mayor and expressing her support for rent control, a lot of people said, oh, it's all fine and good that Michelle Wu supports this, but it's never going to happen. But after this hearing, it looks like it actually could. What is changing?
Well, the big change is that back when Wu was running, there was a widely held assumption that Baker would seek re-election and probably achieve it. Now that the Democrats have a much better chance of winning the governor's office, that changes the whole equation. There is a possibility there. There is a possibility, and it's a possibility that leadership might get behind this. And let's not forget, the legislature is a very hierarchical organization. Right before the hearing, I talked to a real veteran social activist. We were talking off the record, so I don't want to mention his name, but he told me that although the real estate lobby is extremely powerful on Beacon Hill, for the first time in years, he sees a glimmer of hope that rent control might actually become a reality.
Interesting.
Things tend to change, and they did.
Marcela, last question to you. Staying on this topic, and just answer briefly if you can, because I have let things go on too long. But rent control is very popular in Boston. There was a recent poll done by Mass Inc., which showed 76% of Boston residents supporting it, compared to just 21% who opposed it, which might be why Mayor Wu's victory in last year's election was so emphatic. Do you think that her version of rent control, which involves capping the rate at which rents can increase, giving developers other concessions in return for those caps, for example, allowing them to build more densely, could you imagine the real estate and development communities ultimately getting behind where she wants to go?
Well, yeah, but that's not the whole issue. You're forgetting about incumbent landlords, right? The landlords who, going forward, you may come up with the right set of incentives for developers to, cap rent increases. But
Fair
what
point.
about the landlords that we already, we're talking about two different populations here, right?
Yep.
And so, the fact that, rent control polls well, I think about it in the same sense that, who's going to oppose rent control in a question in a poll, right? It's like immigration. Everyone is in favor of, reforming our system. But when push comes to shove, it's really hard to do politically. Maybe the political wins are going to be different now. We have a Democratic governor in the state house, but at the end of the day, you're dealing with, I don't know that you can come up with some incentives for landlords to buy into, the cap increases.
A bracing reality check there for anyone who's excited about rent control coming back. Marcela García and Peter Kadzis, thank you both.
Thank you for having me.
There has been a lot to keep track of these days when it comes to the political and public policy aspects of COVID. Sometimes it's not possible to distinguish between the two. Case in point, this protest to Boston's impending vaccine mandates, which has become a near daily occurrence outside Mayor Michelle Wu's Roslindale home.
You guys don't want to hear us every single day talk to your neighbor, Michelle Wu, and tell her that we should not be mandated to take a vaccine that does not work in order to keep our jobs.
Your regular reminder here that vaccines work very well at preventing hospitalization and death. I'm joined now by Boston City Hall reporter Saraya Wintersmith, who brought us that sound and those photos, and Craig LeMoult, who's been covering a whole host of COVID-related issues for the GBH newsroom throughout the pandemic. Hello to both of you. Saraya, tell me a little more about the scene at the mayor's home. Did the protesters maintain that level of volume and vigor the whole time you were there?
Yeah, Adam, it's really crazy. Picture, if you will, just a quiet residential street just before the sun rises. It's chilly and you or your neighbors are probably just starting to stir out of bed. Maybe you're waking up your kids and getting them ready to go to school, pick up your phone, look at it, and then all of a sudden there's this sound of music and it's amplified by a stereo system and they're shouting.
How did the neighbors that you spoke with feel about having this become a regular feature of life on their formerly quiet Roslindale Street?
The folks in Roslindale were adamant about expressing to the protesters that they should take their activity to City Hall. Both of the women that I talked to who just passed by wanted to stop and express their frustration directly to them and say, hey, this is not right. Who has an elderly mother and kids in the house
And the response was, if you don't like it, then it's incumbent on you to make the mayor change her tune on this, right?
Exactly.
Craig, let me hop to you on a different topic. You're working on a story right now involving the strain that the pandemic has put on mental health care. Tell me a little more about what that strain is doing.
Yeah, it deals with the emergency room beds in the state. Of course, it's a pandemic and emergency rooms beds are in high demand. And it turns out that a lot of those emergency room beds in Massachusetts are currently being taken up with behavioral health patients who are there because there's not another bed available for them, an inpatient psychiatric bed for them to move into. So they're essentially boarding in emergency rooms at a time where emergency rooms are, very, very needed. Numbers out today, as of Monday, 605 patients were boarding in Massachusetts emergency rooms. And it's not just for short periods of time either. The average is 6 days, and it's even worse for kids because there are fewer beds available. Inpatient beds are available for kids. The average kid is staying for 9 days in an emergency room.
Oof. And I have to say that if you are in intense psychological duress, intense enough that you've gone to the ER, I would think the last thing that you need is to be situated in the emergency room indefinitely. You, I know, have identified a couple causes of this, staffing shortages that have unfolded during the pandemic, also the increased psychological stress from the pandemic. Are there measures being taken to address the problems you just described?
Yes, there absolutely are. For one thing, the state's actually been working on opening new beds. They got 250 beds online, but those beds are only good if you actually have staff that's available to staff them, which has been really the main issue. They're using federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act to incentivize more people into the field so they can get more people in, even using some of that for loan repayment. Some of the hospitals are working with outside state staffing agencies to bring in temporary workers. And there's new state legislation. It's actually passed the Senate. It's before the House right now, which would address this in a number of ways, including creating a new data portal that would be available for hospitals to really get a better sense of where hospital beds are available and to try and kind of facilitate moving those patients out of the emergency room and into appropriate care.
The legislature doesn't always move quickly. This seems like a case where it might be beneficial for them to act with some dispatch. Saraya, let me go back to you for the last word here. Boston's vax mandates kick in tomorrow for customers and many private businesses, also for city workers. A judge tossed out an effort to challenge those requirements, stay them in court this week. What comes next on the legal front, very briefly?
Sure. The short answer there is that the unions are trying to figure out now where's the best place for them to continue to press their grievance. They've already gone to the city labor relations department. They could go back to the court. They could go to the state. They're just trying to figure out where they can continue their argument.
Thank you for that. I had not known what you just shared, so I appreciate it. Good to talk with both of you, Saraya and Craig. And next time, I promise we'll talk at greater length. Thank you for being here. Again, you can hear and see more from Saraya and Craig along with the rest of the GBH News team on GBH Radio 89.7 and online at gbhnews.org. That is it for tonight, but do come back next week and please keep sharing your feedback with us. For now, thank you for watching and good night.